Shaivism seems at times to be shrouded in mystery. This podcast aims to bring some clarity on what Kashmir Shaivism is, to explain some fundamental notions of the spiritual path and why this path may be relevant to us. Joining me now are Eleni and Nikos, teachers of Kashmir Shaivism in London. So to you first, Eleni, what is Kashmir Shaivism?
Kashmir Shaivism is a complete path of spiritual realization that gives everything one needs to reach spiritual perfection and spiritual freedom, liberation. All techniques and methods bring us more awareness and closer to our essence, closer to our heart. Deepening the awareness of the heart leads to greater and greater freedom. The main emphasis is placed on the godly grace and on the awakening of the heart.
It's interesting that you say awakening of the heart. Nikos, what's meant by awakening of the heart?
So this very much depends on the level of our consciousness, the level of our understanding, what we perceive to be our center, if you want. We perceive heart at a different level, and life is lived very differently from depending on the center we are at each stage in our life. Like, for example, the ordinary human consciousness, we can say, has as a center, although they would not call it that, but it's the ego, what we can refer to, and which is not a true center. It gives a certain sense of individuality, so there is a certain gathering around the ego of certain notions, certain energies, if you want, and it gives a sense of I am Nikos, I do this, I do that, I am a brother, a father, I do this role, and so on. And this is what we identify ourselves with. And therefore, at this level, we can say that we are limited also by the usual language that we use. And there is, we put labels, we have a lot of fogginess, there's no clarity. Definitely there is separation, because it's us and the rest of the world. It's us and you, me and you, and so on and so forth. And preconceived ideas, we are very predictable, we can say. And we can perceive things as being repeated, repetition and boredom. So this is how is life lived from the level of the ego. Whereas
To call that personality, and you feel that they've actually worked hard to create this personality, this ego, if you like, and it may be something that they don't want to give up.
yes, yeah, exactly. And because they, as you said, they create they put a lot of effort into achieving whatever they achieved, and they identify with their achievements, but still it is a limited perspective upon life. Whereas in Kashmir Shaivism says, where the journey starts is when you awaken the soul, and this is where a truer center comes into play. Now, when the soul is awakened, the mind gets a second role, let's say. It's not the main actor anymore, and therefore the heart is more awakened, we can say. So we can have a transfer of the center from the inferior mind to the heart, or what we can refer to sometimes in the yoga and tantra as well as the supramental, going above the mind, the ordinary mind or the inferior mind, and therefore we have better control of our emotions, of the energies. There's more connection. We can see what is unifying us with the others, a better state of unification, a contemplation. We're not labeling. Language is not anymore the ordinary language, but we are getting more familiar with the symbolic language, and therefore also we are more detached. Yet that is not, again, the true center. It's a truer center than the ego, but it's not a true center. But it's a beginning, and this is what Shaivism says. It's a beginning of the journey. And then the real essence of ours is what we call the immortal supreme self. And this is what is giving us an even better state of unification. When you see the unity in diversity, we can see the universe is in us, but also ourselves reflected in the universe. The being becomes more cosmic. We become more cosmic. Our experiences become universal experiences.
People have a sense of feeling expanded,
Exactly.
Literally their mind feels like they're expanded, they can understand more.
Exactly, yeah. The consciousness is much, much more expanded, even from the previous level, compared to the level of the ego, when the heart is awakened, the soul is awakened, and therefore it's a higher perspective. Then now with Atman being revealed, the Supreme Immortal Self being revealed, the level is even higher.
Yet, Vivian, you mentioned something, the mind feels expanded, but in that level there is no mind. The mind is quiet. The role of the mind is very different in that level. There is like quietness, silence, and it's more the state of cosmic being. Because we mentioned about freedom before, when we are in that level of the ego, we believe we are free. We believe we have choices and so on. Yet the mind takes over there, the inferior mind, as Nikos mentioned, and trying to understand what takes place in everyday reality. But it's not that we're living this reality. We are living what the inferior mind gives us as reality. It's like a photograph instead of the actual place. Like instead of being in the forest, we see a photograph of the forest and we believe we are in the forest. We believe we are free and everything, but we are very predictable, very... we work with certain very specific limitations, and still we believe that we know everything. Still the soul is limited by certain aspects, but definitely it is truer center, because in order to be that level, the mind starts stopping, become more silent, and that gives us the possibility to see ourselves from a very different perspective. Yet we mention ego, soul, Atman, the Supreme Self Atman, which feels like home. It is a home for us. Yet, Kashmir Shaivism, we don't stop there. It's one more step.
And that step is the identification of our heart, at the level of Atman though now, with the Supreme Heart, the heart of the Supreme Absolute Consciousness, the heart of God. And this is the highest center, we can say, the highest heart, we can call it that.
What are the barriers to awakening in the heart in the first place?
It seems natural to be in a heart, and it's true. There is one aspect that even at the very beginning of Tantra Sara, written by Abhinavagupta, it is mentioned at the very beginning, and that is ignorance, which is the cause of all our suffering. Forgetfulness. We forget who truly we are. And there are two types of ignorance. One is the one we are born with, the inherent ignorance, and one is the intellectual ignorance. So we are born with this inferior mind, and it's the chatterbox there. And the intellectual ignorance is that during our life, through different aspects, like different kind of education and so on, we truly believe certain things are the absolute truth. And somehow we are closing ourselves, believing that this is it, this is the truth, this is the knowledge. Socrates said, I know one thing, that I know nothing. And if we keep this possibility in us, we are not closing ourselves, because in reality, only when we truly and fully unite with the Supreme Absolute Consciousness, and this is what we aim in everything we're doing in Kashmir Shaivism, to identify with this supreme absolute consciousness, with the heart of all, and all techniques, no matter from where we start, lead us there. And this is the beauty also, because we need to have this honest moment to say, where am I really? This by itself, this simple question, like really, okay, I heard that there are different level of centers, different level of consciousness. Maybe up to now I believe that I'm really knowledgeable, but do I still have some certain ignorance? So where exactly am I at the moment? And then by knowing this, Kashmir Shaivism gives you different tools to start from exactly where each of us is, to lead us there, to this heart, to home. So in each of these type of ignorance, there is a remedy. There is a type of knowledge. So for this inherent ignorance, the remedy is to experience other states of being where the mind quiets down and is silence. And then we start feeling a certain state of expansion and bliss, certain experiences that no one can tell us about. No matter how many books we may read, it is something important to experience this personal experience. And then for the intellectual ignorance, we have the intellectual knowledge. And this is based on reading authentic spiritual texts, sacred texts. And by reading this, what is happening in ourselves is that we go in line, as we said before, like more in line with the vibration of our soul. And suddenly the spiritual intuition awakens. This aha moment where like everything makes sense, or something beyond everything we read, but everything makes sense. And this is a starting point, because this is beyond the mind, it's above the mind, and this is the way. And none of them is, both of them actually, better said, is important to be there. Because if you have only the studying of the text and this moment of spiritual intuition, and we don't have the experience, how would we really know what is samadhi, for example? It's just an intellectual knowledge, just a word, a name. On the other hand, if we have only experience, we experience amazing states, but we don't know, we have no clue what it is. How can we go back again? So we really need to have both type of knowledge in order to really to have the whole picture. But also there's another element that we emphasize a lot in Kashmir Shaivism, and this is godly grace. Godly grace exists, and it is very fundamental how open we are to it. And so on one hand we need to experience, on the other hand we need to improve somehow the intellectual knowledge, but also to be open to this and to the godly grace.
And this is something that we do in our daily life. People who study, like myself,
Yes.
study Kashmir Shaivism.
And myself.
We are encouraged to apply it in everyday life. So it's not just an ancient, dusty theory. It's long books that we've dusted off and we're learning, just trying to let the world. It is actually applicable in the 21st century.
Yes, exactly. It is applicable because there is this fundamental notion in each of us. All of us, we want to return home, where we're coming from. And the teachings in the class and when we study by ourselves and so on, and it is one thing. Yet, at the end of each class, we give this suggestion. What about putting some of this? It might be something very simple, like the use of language, that we sometimes take it for granted. and see how we use this language in everyday life and what limitations or possibilities it may bring to us. And then everybody coming with their experience, enriching each other, and give impulses and applying, because it is said, what gram of practice is worth of tons of theory. Because if we intellectually only read, then it's very dry. We need to start seeing how this applies in our everyday life.
Yeah, what I also want to say is that even in the study of these texts, and here is about the importance also of the, if you want, the intellectual knowledge a little bit, is that there are two, maybe from that text is an extract, which is like one line, 2 words actually, 2 words. And having an understanding of that, first of all, in order to understand what those 2 words mean, you can read the commentary that accompanies each of these sutras. They're called these verses. But we need to perceive it and feel it also with a certain spiritual intuition, meaning that awakening that we spoke about earlier, to have an awakened heart, not to judge it only through the inferior mind, but to see it and feel it with the heart. And then this is when the aha moment comes. So you read it, you have a understanding, and it's a very profound understanding, and something is being animating in your soul, and then is that aha moment that comes. And then by extracting it and putting it into your daily life, because there are practical ways you can apply what you were taught, what you heard, then even that experiential knowledge comes to match and to have the both combined together.
In the classes, we have what we call exemplifications, which is a type of meditation that exemplifies a state of being. For example, how is to live with an awakened soul.
And then using that as an example, then we can hopefully repeat it as well at home to relive it and make it our own state.
You have to have both. You have to have the experiential as well as the intellectual.
Yes. And so you need to know where you're standing, first of all, where you're starting. And also in the Kashmir Shaivism, there are ways that we can discover where we are through the teachings. And then, from there, a map is given. And this also here, we can maybe speak about the Shiva Sutras.
The Shiva Sutras are one of the most ancient texts in the Kashmir Shaivism tradition. It is referred to as a treasure text because it was the legend says that it was a stone with the sutras, the verses written on it, and it emerged from a lake, and then one of the exponents of the Kashmir Shaivism tradition who memorized the sutras, and then the stone again submerged back into the lake, and that sage from this tradition was Vasugupta. And the sutras, these verses, they are offered in chapters, in 3 chapters, and each of these chapters is actually about one of the paths that lead us home, according again to the level of our consciousness. So they start by the highest path. Although we speak about 3 fundamental paths, actually there are, tradition also mentions a 4th path, which actually are, in essence, it's one path, but there are different entry points to this one path. So the highest path, which is also referred to as the no path, because it's so close to entering and to reaching, to making the leap into the bosom of God, God's heart, just by a simple word or a simple touch, and this is possible because the beings on that level are so already over such a high state of consciousness that a simple trigger, a simple gesture or word, something which inspires them, then they can make the leap into that heart of God and unify with God's heart. The one which is below the path, which is a very high again path, is called the godly path, the path of Shiva, Shambhavopaya. And it's characterized by beings who have a very intense state of aspiration to unite with God. They have already awakened and revealed their supreme immortal self, Atman. So we are actually speaking about exceptionally high levels of consciousness beings. And then the path which is below that is the path of deified energy, or the path of Shakti, Shaktopaya. Paya means upaya, rather. Upaya means path, and Shakti and upaya, Shaktopaya as a composite word, is the path of deified energy. And here is also very it's above the level of the ordinary human consciousness, because we are speaking about a path which starts from an awakened soul, a path where the mind is already considerably calmed down, where we have a very good mastering of the energies. We're not taken by the energies, but we're controlling the energies, and have a mastery over the inferior mind as well, an awakened heart. And so what we discussed earlier, an awakened soul. And then there's a path of the individual, as it is referred to in Sanskrit and in Kashmir Shaivism as Anavopaya, the path of the Anu, of the individual. And this is, let's say, most people would easier relate to. It doesn't mean that everyone is on Anavopaya, because even that requires to have a state of aspiration to discover who you truly are, to go on the journey. Not everyone is by default on Anavopaya, because some people say, they have no interest whatsoever. So, but it is the most accessible for the ordinary human consciousness. So the Shiva Sutras are describing life or different notions seen from each of these three levels, from these three paths, from the path of Shiva, the path of the godly path, or the path of deified energy, the path of Shakti, or the individual path, Anavopaya.
And these sutras answer fundamental questions. How is life if lived in that level of consciousness? So the human beings whose consciousness is in Shambhavopaya, when they ask the fundamental question, who am I? What is the answer? And their connection with the others, and the connection to knowledge, and so on. And by studying these sutras, we're really going to maybe feel inspired, even maybe we're not there at the moment or predominantly. We may kind of realize that we had a meditation, that we experienced that. So again, the emphasis is here that no matter what the most simple method or technique, it starts from where we are, and all the methods or techniques, all of them leads to the heart of God. So this is the beauty. And maybe the uniqueness in this path, because constantly we are reminded where we are leading towards. And also, in each of these paths is offered not only the tools, but also the pitfalls, like what may happen and we can fall from where we are to a lower level of consciousness. What are the maybe obstacles that we may encounter, even if we are in a high level of consciousness at this specific moment? Because as mentioned before, until we reach this destination, we are prone to all sorts of tests, and somehow we are giving warnings, saying if you are there, you need, for example, in that level, you need to be careful on this or this and this, because this may be an obstacle. So it's wonderful to study as an inspiration, as also of understanding, but also as a way of how, from wherever we are, no matter where we are, if we have the aspiration mentioned before, we can reach the heart of God.
You mentioned a lot reaching the heart of God and going home. Does Kashmir Shaivism say that is the purpose of life?
Yes, this is the purpose, the final destination, and it is from this perspective that all the techniques, all the methods, everything actually, any spiritual practice we have in our life is done with. So, and this is fundamental because, and this may be also specific, I think it was mentioned also earlier, specific to this path, that you do even a certain bodily posture or an asana or a certain meditation, whereas on some other, from a certain other perspective, it's to calm down the mind or to have a better flexibility or better, more harmonious body and so on and so forth. But Kashmir Shaivism tells you, you do this to reach home, to go to be united with God's heart. And this is from that perspective. And that's why also they say, and this is what they are, another specific unique aspect of Kashmir Shaivism is that they give a lot of emphasis on the spiritual efficiency of all the different practices. Whatever you do needs to have the spiritual efficiency. Yes, but it does not negate that there are other effects that come with all the practices, like the harmonization of the body, like the calming down of the mind. But ultimately, what you want to do is to reach that final destination, the identification of your heart, of your revealed heart, the revealed self, with God's heart.
It's interesting that you talk about the direct access, because I was brought up in the Christian tradition where there was quite a hierarchy where you had to study and learn and go through a kind of intermediary, really, with the priest or the vicar or the bishop. But this is a spiritual tradition where it's just between you and God. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yet also it depends on again the level of the consciousness. It offers very much the tools to recognize the godliness and God in everything and in every being and so on. We may need to have certain guidance, and the guidance can come in different forms. The guidance can come in the forms of the texts, of the authentic spiritual texts, or of others on the path, maybe more experienced to have attain that state, or some other elevated beings like angels or spiritual guides and so on, so have been there and then can offer that. Like, for instance, Lenny mentioned Abhinavagupta, who is the most known exponent of the Kashmir Shaivism tradition, and he was a liberated being, and through his compassion, having been there, that's why he offered all these commentaries and wrote extensively to guide others as well. So it's a bit different from what you described in the traditional, let's say, Christian background. But even there are parallels with Kashmir Shaivism and Christianity or other traditions. So they're not kind of there's no conflict, let's say, there. It's just a different, maybe different approach different perspective at times.
In this tradition, there is one way that was revealed that's called the direct recognition, pratyabhishna. And in this way, which is actually only a few people can really follow this because it's quite a high elevated way, is that you see God in everything and in you. The only thing is to recognize that God is there. But the moment we will, and this shift happens in us, it is a moment of going home immediately. This is the direct recognition, and is one way that is unique in this path. Yet, as Nikos mentioned, depending on the level of consciousness, we may need to have some help and support and so on. And if the level of consciousness is quite high, there is no need of any intermediary anymore.
It's been very important to see that I don't need to ask anyone's permission. And actually my sense of God has changed, because for a long time I just kept seeing him as a rather lovely old man in a golden chair with grey hair. I could not get past that. And now I have what feels to me as a much more wholesome perspective, connection with an intimate connection, and it feels very wholesome and real, as opposed to what I was brought up believing, which is just one image of God.
And this is one wonderful example of shifting the level of our knowledge from one to a superior one. And this connection with God becomes more and more mysterious. Initially, I felt things were more separate in all different levels. In a level of like me here, God somewhere else. But also in my everyday life, things I was doing, sometimes I couldn't see any connection and relationship. And what I feel that Kashmir Shaivism brought to me is this unity, this unification. I start making sense of everything. It's not separate so much anymore. I feel more and more the connection. It's not this funny thing, now I'm doing my spiritual practice and now I'm working and now I'm going to pray and so on, but rather it's everything one. And another thing that I love in this tradition is beauty as a spiritual path, as a way of reaching spiritual liberation. Because Abhinavagupta, that is, as mentioned already, his name a couple of times, he was also brought this aspect so much about beauty and aesthetics and art being a spiritual path. And that touched me because I love beauty and I love creativity and arts. While I was studying Kashmir Shaivism, there was a specific moment, and it was a connection with the yoga of beauty, where I felt like reaching this union. It is possible and it's accessible for each of us. And it's not so far as maybe as I believed before. And this is something that was really transforming in me in connection to this tradition.
It's very true what you say about the aesthetics. Some of the teachings in Kashmir Shaivism, when I write about them, I find I'm writing poetry.
Yes, we become more poets with Kashmir Shaivism because, as Nikos mentioned earlier, the more awaken our heart, the language of the heart, here speaking about the soul, the living soul, in that level at least, the language there is the poetic language and symbolic language. And suddenly we go away from the previous way of thinking and we go to a different realm, which is this symbolic, poetic, beautiful, mysterious, full of wonder realm. It's like another universe. The more we touch this and awaken and dynamize our soul.
So to anyone listening to this podcast, why would you say Kashmir Shaivism is relevant to them?
think whenever there is an curiosity or an aspiration to, or a desire to find out more about yourself, or to attain a higher or a longer lasting maybe state of happiness, or to answer certain questions, or to fill in certain gaps. Some people have said this, for instance, that I have studied this tradition, or I have an understanding this, but Kashmir Shaivism seems to be giving this more global perspective.
The tradition, it gives us a lot of answers, it gives a lot of understandings, it can help us to come closer to our essence and many things, but it's up to us to give this time. We say, and many people say, there is no time. We have no time. This is something we keep hearing a lot. But we like to do something, we like to practice something, but we don't have time. What Kashmir Shaivism does is wonderful, because where we practice is in our everyday life. So we don't have to change something in our life. Yet we take the teachings into our daily life and we shift the perspective, awareness. And this makes a very big difference. So this is a call to bring God in everything, in our everyday life.
Add to what Eleni said about this unification as well, of it has this unifying factor that Kashmir Shaivism is offering. What personally I find amazing is the richness, but also the accessibility of the tools that Kashmir Shaivism is offering, with which you can make significant steps on the spiritual, in your spiritual evolution. Having that perspective, we said earlier that whatever we do, if we look at it from the right perspective, then that can truly help me. That can truly propel me in my spiritual evolution, while also at the same time maintain this sense of mystery and wonder, which is essential. Because if you don't have that state that of wonder and curiosity, then you cannot really open up and be open to the energies of the soul or the energies of Atman. And this is also what Eleni said about this state of hope that Kashmir Shaivism is offering to everyone, is that the state of the sense that it is attainable, it can be done here and now, and on the back of this state of wonder and mystery and and the sense of fulfillment and progression. And also, I personally have seen that by being on this path, realizing that certain life circumstances have appear because of that empowerment that the Kashmir Shaivism is offering. Empowerment not in the sense of being more, I don't know, winning the lottery or whatever, but becoming richer in and closer and opening up to these energies of the soul and the self. Having a different perspective on how I approach my spiritual practice, and to see the necessity of whatever I do need to put a different view, and to see the essential in the spiritual practice. What is it there for, and how by practicing this, whatever it might be, what is it really offering me, and what is it actually aligned to what my true purpose is in life. And as I said earlier, it's like giving this a certain higher perspective, which then allows me to see different circumstances that I find myself in from a different perspective, and then act in a different way and approach them in a different way.
What about limitations? How does Kashmir Shaivism help you transcend limitations?
In this model that we spoke about earlier of the tattvas, the building blocks, it's very clearly defined what the limitations are, or the main limitations are, through under which even our soul, even the awakened soul, is still conditioned, and therefore gives us first describes what the limitations are, and we can see them clearly and how they appear, how they appear in our life, how we can relate these limitations in our life, and therefore also give us the hope that what lies above those limitations, and in this way we can our aspiration is in transcending them, in going through them, as it also more graphically, let's say, offered to pierce through these limitations. Like, for instance, it's said one of the limitations is time. I don't have time, and Eleni mentioned about this earlier. So therefore, applying what we learn in our daily life, the time barrier is somehow broken, overcome, and therefore I am piercing through this limitation of time.
So talking of practicing, what happens in the classroom?
So in the classroom, we're going to bring all the elements we mentioned today, which is on one hand is going to be presentations based on sacred spiritual texts from this tradition, with a lot of commentary, and also we do the exemplifications I mentioned before, and it's usually around 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and also we suggest what we can do in our everyday life. So we have feedback and we communicate about all of these things, and everybody receives also printed notes so that you can study if you want. Based on what we're learning, there are some certain techniques or some certain specific initiation in mantras, for example, and so on. And we give the opportunity by certain tests that take place in certain moments, if you pass, to receive some spiritual gifts. And this is not obligatory, but it's an extra thing that if people want to take it, it is there, and offers really certain wonderful spiritual gifts for the ones who pass.
Yeah, I think in summary, this combination of intellectual knowledge through the presentation of different notions and through the exemplification meditations, so we are aiming to live the states that are maybe presented in an extensive form during the actual class.
Eleni and Nikos, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian, also. Thank you very much.